Have you ever been stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire, wishing your car could somehow fix the problem itself? Imagine a world where you wouldn't need a spare tire, a jack, or even an air pump, because your car could inflate its own tires on demand. Sounds like something out of a futuristic concept, right? But what if I told you this was a real feature introduced over 50 years ago? Back in 1969, Pontiac introduced one of the most bizarre yet fascinating features in automotive history, the Instant-Aire system. A built-in tire inflation system that let you pump air into your tires using nothing more than your car's engine. No need for a separate air compressor, no messy tire sealants, just your car itself providing the air you needed. But here's the catch, despite being a seemingly brilliant innovation, the Instant-Aire system disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Today, most car enthusiasts, even those who have spent a lifetime admiring classic American muscle, have never even heard of it. So, what happened? Was it a piece of engineering genius ahead of its time, or just another failed gimmick from an era full of wild automotive experiments? Stick around till the end of this video, and you'll not only learn exactly how this mysterious system worked, but also why it vanished and whether it could have a place in modern cars today. Trust me, this is a piece of automotive history you don't want to miss. The 1960s, a time of bold innovation. To understand the Instant-Aire system, we first need to step back into the late 1960s, a golden era of automotive innovation. This was a time when car manufacturers weren't just competing on horsepower and speed. They were racing to introduce the wildest, most convenient, and most futuristic features possible. Safety, comfort, and practicality were becoming major selling points, but at the same time, carmakers were also experimenting with ideas that had never been tried before. Some were successful, like cruise control, which Cadillac introduced in the 1950s and became an industry standard. Others, like push-button transmissions and retractable hardtops, were ambitious but ultimately short-lived. Pontiac, in particular, was a brand that thrived on innovation. By the late 60s, it had already cemented its reputation as a performance-driven company, thanks to cars like the GTO and the Firebird. But Pontiac also had a history of introducing unusual and sometimes experimental features, hoping to set itself apart from the competition. And that's where Instant-Aire comes into the picture. What made Instant-Aire so special? The Instant-Aire system was designed to eliminate one of the most frustrating problems every driver faced: flat tires. Remember, this was long before modern run-flat tires or roadside assistance services were common. If you had a flat tire in the 1960s, you either had to change it yourself or flag down a passing motorist for help. And if you were driving through the middle of nowhere, good luck finding a service station nearby. Pontiac engineers thought they had the perfect solution: why not use the car's own engine to provide air for the tires? Their idea was simple: tap into the engine's existing vacuum system and redirect that air to inflate a flat tire. No extra tools, no special equipment, just a clever way of using the car's own mechanics to solve a real-world problem. It was a feature that, on paper, made complete sense. It was practical, it was innovative, and it had the potential to save drivers from countless frustrating situations. But as we'll see later, there were some serious flaws that ultimately led to its downfall. Why this feature was so appealing to drivers? To truly appreciate why Pontiac even attempted such a system, we need to think about the mindset of drivers in the late 60s and early 70s. Back then, the average driver, especially those buying full-size Pontiacs like the Bonneville or Catalina, valued self-sufficiency. There was a deep sense of pride in being able to fix your own car, understand its mechanics, and handle unexpected roadside troubles without relying on anyone else. The Instant-Aire system catered perfectly to that mentality. It gave drivers a sense of control, allowing them to handle a flat tire without having to struggle with a jack, lug wrench, or spare tire. In a way, it was an extension of the independent spirit that defined American car culture at the time. But despite all of its promise, Instant-Aire didn't last. The system was quietly phased out after only a short time, and today, it remains one of those forgotten pieces of automotive history that only a handful of collectors and enthusiasts even know about. So, what went wrong? Was it too expensive? Too unreliable? Or was it simply a case of an idea that was ahead of its time? In the next section, we'll dive into the exact mechanics of how the Instant-Aire system worked, and why, despite its ingenuity, it was doomed from the start. Stay tuned. The 1960s were a time of bold ideas, fearless engineering, and an endless pursuit of innovation in the automotive world. It was an era when car manufacturers weren't afraid to take risks, because risk-taking was what set brands apart. This was the decade that gave birth to muscle cars, big block engines, and groundbreaking safety features. But beyond performance and power, automakers were obsessed with one thing: convenience. They wanted to make cars more user-friendly, more advanced, and, most importantly, more self-sufficient. That's why companies were constantly introducing experimental features, hoping to revolutionize the driving experience. Some of these innovations became industry standards, like power steering and disc brakes. Others, like Pontiac's Instant-Aire system, faded into obscurity. Yet, when you think about it, the Instant-Aire system wasn't just another gimmick. It was a direct response to a real problem. Flat tires were common in the 1960s, and roadside assistance was rare. A simple nail or sharp rock could leave you stranded for hours in the middle of nowhere. Pontiac engineers thought they had a brilliant solution, one that could save drivers from a major inconvenience without needing any external tools or help. It was a system designed for an era when drivers valued independence. In those days, most car owners knew how to work on their vehicles. They carried toolkits in the trunk, knew how to change spark plugs, and took pride in handling their own maintenance. Pontiac's innovation fit right into that mindset. Instead of struggling with a spare tire, drivers could now rely on their own car to get them back on the road. But what made the Instant-Aire system so unique? And how exactly did it work? How Instant-Aire functioned, a clever engineering trick. At first glance, the Instant-Aire system looked deceptively simple. It wasn't some high-tech gadget or an electronic device. Instead, it was based on an existing mechanical principle, using the engine's own vacuum pressure to provide air for inflating tires. In a typical car engine, vacuum pressure is created when the pistons move up and down, pulling in air and fuel for combustion. This vacuum is normally used to power brake boosters, air conditioning systems, and other auxiliary functions. Pontiac engineers had the idea to redirect some of this vacuum pressure to serve another purpose: inflating a flat tire. Here's how it worked. The system connected a small hose from the engine's intake manifold to a valve inside the car. When a driver needed to inflate a tire, they would attach this hose to the tire's valve stem. By activating the Instant-Aire system, the engine's vacuum would begin pulling air into the tire, slowly inflating it. In just a few minutes, a completely flat tire could be brought back to drivable condition, without the need for a spare or an air compressor. It was a simple, almost elegant solution, one that didn't require extra moving parts, complicated electronics, or special equipment. The very car you were driving became its own tire inflator. On paper, it was a game changer. Imagine being on a long road trip, hitting a pothole, and discovering a slow leak in your tire. Instead of searching for a gas station or waiting for help, you could fix the problem on the spot, using nothing but your own car's engine. But if this system was so practical, why didn't it become a standard feature in every car? The downsides that led to Instant-Aire's failure. Despite its ingenuity, the Instant-Aire system had serious flaws, problems that eventually led to its downfall. First and foremost, it wasn't as reliable as Pontiac had hoped. The system depended entirely on the engine's vacuum pressure, which varied depending on engine speed, altitude, and mechanical condition. This meant that in some situations, it worked well, but in others, it didn't generate enough pressure to fully inflate a tire. Another issue was time. Unlike modern air compressors that can inflate a tire in seconds, the instant-air system took several minutes to pump enough air into a tire to make it roadworthy. In emergency situations, this could be a frustrating delay, especially in harsh weather or dangerous roadside conditions. Then came the biggest issue: engine contamination. Since the system was connected directly to the intake manifold, there was always a risk that dirt, dust, or even small debris from the tire valve could get sucked into the engine. Over time, this could damage internal components, reducing performance and increasing maintenance costs. Mechanics who worked on these cars often advised owners not to use the system too frequently to avoid potential damage. There was also the matter of cost versus benefit. While instant air was a fascinating concept, most drivers weren't willing to pay extra for a feature they might never actually use. The average buyer in 1969 was more interested in performance, comfort, and reliability, not experimental add-ons. For all these reasons, Pontiac quietly phased out the instant-air system after only a short time. It never made its way into mainstream production, and by the early 1970s, it was all but forgotten. Yet, for the small number of car enthusiasts who remember it, instant-air remains one of the most intriguing features ever put in a car. It was a glimpse into a time when automakers were willing to think outside the box, even if their ideas didn't always succeed. But just because instant-air disappeared doesn't mean it wasn't ahead of its time. Today, modern off-road vehicles and luxury SUVs come with onboard air compressors, allowing drivers to adjust tire pressure on demand. In many ways, this is just a more advanced version of what Pontiac tried to do back in 1969. What Pontiac attempted was ambitious. It was practical, creative, and perfectly suited for an era when drivers took pride in self-reliance. But as history has shown, even the best ideas don't always catch on. For an idea that seemed so practical, the instant-air system should have been a major success. A built-in tire inflation system could have changed the way drivers dealt with emergencies. Yet, despite its potential, it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. One of the biggest reasons was public perception. The average driver in 1969 wasn't necessarily looking for high-tech roadside solutions, they wanted a car that was reliable, powerful, and easy to maintain. The instant-air system, though innovative, felt like an unnecessary complication. Most car owners were already comfortable with the traditional method of carrying a spare tire and a jack. The idea of using an engine to inflate a tire seemed almost unnatural to many. Then, there was the problem of trust. When people buy a new feature in a car, they expect it to work every single time. A flat tire is an emergency situation. If a system like instant-air failed when someone needed it most, it could create frustration and disappointment. And because the system relied on engine vacuum pressure, its effectiveness varied. Some users reported that it worked perfectly, while others found it unreliable, depending on their engine condition and altitude. This inconsistency made many drivers skeptical. Another major issue was maintenance and wear. The system was simple in theory but required the engine to pull double duty, not just powering the car, but also inflating tires when needed. This created additional strain on the intake manifold and raised concerns about long-term wear. Mechanics worried that prolonged use could introduce contaminants into the engine, which could damage internal components over time. In a decade where American cars were built to be durable and low maintenance, anything that could potentially cause extra wear was a red flag. Why car companies avoided instant-air? For an automotive innovation to succeed, it needs industry-wide acceptance. If a new feature is truly revolutionary, other manufacturers will eventually adopt and refine it. Think about power steering, fuel injection, and anti-lock brakes. Once one company perfected them, others followed, turning them into industry standards. But that never happened with instant-air. Pontiac was the only major manufacturer to experiment with this concept, and other carmakers showed little interest. This lack of adoption was another signal that the system had too many weaknesses. One reason was cost. While Instant-Aire wasn't the most expensive feature to add, it was still an extra component that required development, manufacturing, and marketing. For a company to invest in a feature like this, it needed to be more than just a niche selling point, it had to be something that the public demanded. Unfortunately, tire inflation wasn't high on the list of priorities for most buyers in 1969. Another issue was the rise of radial tires. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, radial tires were becoming the new industry standard. Unlike older bias-ply tires, which were more prone to punctures and blowouts, radial tires offered better durability, longer tread life, and improved resistance to flats. This meant that tire-related breakdowns were becoming less common. As a result, the need for a built-in inflation system wasn't as critical as it might have been in previous decades. How the market shifted away from DIY solutions. The 1960s were the last decade where most drivers had a hands-on approach to car maintenance. By the 1970s and 1980s, cars were becoming more complex, and the culture around driving was changing. Instead of fixing problems themselves, more people began relying on professional mechanics and roadside assistance programs. This shift in consumer behavior made features like Instant-Aire feel outdated before they even had a chance to gain popularity. In the 1950s and early 1960s, drivers expected to handle their own repairs. By the 1970s, convenience was more important than self-sufficiency. If a driver had a flat tire, they were more likely to call for help than try to fix it themselves. This change in attitude made Pontiac's innovation feel less relevant. At the same time, car companies were investing in more marketable safety features. Instead of focusing on self-repair technologies, manufacturers prioritized seat belts, crumple zones, and energy-absorbing steering columns. These features were proven to save lives, making them easier to sell to the public. Compared to these safety advancements, Instant-Aire seemed like a minor convenience rather than a game-changing feature. The legacy of Instant-Aire. Even though the Instant-Aire system disappeared, its core idea didn't entirely fade away. Today, onboard air compressors are a common feature in off-road vehicles and heavy-duty trucks. Many modern SUVs and pickup trucks allow drivers to adjust their tire pressure on the go, which is especially useful for off-roading. While these modern systems use electric compressors instead of engine vacuum pressure, the fundamental concept remains the same, a car that can inflate its own tires without external tools. This proves that Pontiac's idea wasn't completely flawed, it was just ahead of its time. Instant-Aire might have been a failed experiment, but it represented something bigger. It was part of an era when car companies weren't afraid to take risks and push the boundaries of what was possible. The 1960s were full of strange and ambitious features, many of which never became mainstream. But that's what made the era special, automakers were willing to experiment, to innovate, and to challenge the status quo. Today, most cars don't come with built-in tire inflation systems, but we have more reliable alternatives. Portable air compressors, run-flat tires, and roadside assistance services have made flat tires less of a crisis than they once were. Yet, for classic car enthusiasts and historians, the Instant-Aire system remains one of the most fascinating what-if features in automotive history. Pontiac may not have changed the world with this invention, but they proved something important, that sometimes, the craziest ideas are the ones worth remembering. The Instant-Aire system wasn't just an attempt at solving a problem, it was a reflection of the bold, experimental mindset that defined the golden age of American cars. The 1960s were an era of optimism and rapid technological progress. Automakers weren't just selling cars, they were selling ideas about the future. This was the decade of space-age styling, muscle cars, and daring engineering experiments. Car companies were constantly trying to outdo one another by offering unique features that promised more power, more comfort, or greater convenience. It was a time when manufacturers believed they could make driving more effortless, and Instant-Aire fit perfectly into that vision. Pontiac, in particular, was known for pushing boundaries. It wasn't just another car brand, it was a company that thrived on innovation. Under the leadership of legendary figures like John DeLorean, Pontiac had already revolutionized the muscle car scene with the GTO. It was a brand that didn't play it safe, and that spirit was evident in the Instant-Aire system. Even though the feature didn't succeed, it's important to remember the mindset behind it. Pontiac was operating in a time when car buyers were excited about technology. People wanted cars that felt futuristic, even if the technology was still in its experimental stages. Features like hidden headlights, automatic climate control, and self-leveling suspensions were all being developed in this era, each trying to make cars feel more advanced. The Instant-Aire system may not have had the lasting impact of some of these other innovations, but it captured the imagination of engineers who believed in a future where cars could do more than just drive. The struggle between innovation and practicality. One of the biggest challenges for any new automotive feature is the balance between innovation and practicality. Just because something is a great idea doesn't mean it will work in the real world. The history of the auto industry is filled with brilliant but impractical inventions, and the Instant-Aire system is a perfect example. From an engineering standpoint, it made perfect sense. It was a simple, elegant solution to a real problem. Yet, as history has shown, automotive success isn't just about good engineering, it's about consumer adoption. The real-world challenges of the Instant-Aire system made it difficult for everyday drivers to trust. Unlike more obvious advancements like power steering or radial tires, Instant-Aire wasn't something that improved the daily driving experience. It was a solution to an occasional problem, which made it harder to justify as a must-have feature. There was also the issue of cost versus benefit. For Pontiac to promote the system aggressively, they would have needed to convince the public that it was superior to carrying a spare tire. But the reality was that most drivers felt safer knowing they had a fully inflated spare in the trunk rather than relying on a vacuum-powered inflation system that took time to work. In the long run, practicality always wins. It's why some of the wildest automotive innovations, like bubble windshields, retractable hardtops, and turbine-powered engines, never made it into mass production. They were fascinating experiments, but they didn't fit into the everyday needs of the average driver. Why some forgotten features become classics. The Instant-Aire system may have disappeared, but it hasn't been entirely forgotten. In fact, features like these tend to become legends among car enthusiasts, not because they were successful, but because they represent a time when automakers dared to think differently. Many classic car fans look back at features like Instant-Aire with nostalgia and appreciation. They see it as a reminder of an era when car companies weren't afraid to take risks. Even though the feature didn't last, it's still part of Pontiac's legacy as an innovative and forward-thinking brand. In the world of classic cars, it's often the strangest, most unconventional features that attract the most attention. That's why things like swiveling front seats, push-button transmissions, and dashboard record players have become talking points in automotive history. These features may not have changed the industry, but they left a mark on the people who remember them. The Instant-Aire system falls into that same category. It was a glimpse into a future that never fully materialized, but one that still fascinates those who appreciate the boldness of 1960s automotive design. Modern-day parallels, how the idea lives on. Even though the Instant-Aire system never caught on, the concept behind it never fully disappeared. Today, the idea of a car being able to inflate its own tires is actually more relevant than ever. Modern off-road vehicles, luxury SUVs, and military trucks often come equipped with onboard air compressors. These systems allow drivers to adjust tire pressure on demand, which is especially useful for off-roading, towing, or extreme weather conditions. In some ways, these modern features are a refined and more effective version of what Pontiac attempted with Instant-Aire. There's also the increasing trend toward self-sufficient vehicles. As technology advances, automakers are developing cars that require less external maintenance. Features like run-flat tires, automatic tire pressure monitoring, and even self-sealing tires have eliminated many of the problems that Instant-Aire was originally designed to solve. This proves that Pontiac's thinking wasn't wrong, it was just ahead of its time. If the technology had been more advanced, and if the consumer mindset had been different, Instant-Aire might have become a standard feature in modern cars. The final verdict, a brilliant failure. Not every innovation succeeds, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth the effort. The Instant-Aire system may have been a commercial failure, but it was a creative success. It showed what was possible when engineers were willing to challenge the status quo and think beyond traditional solutions. In many ways, Instant-Aire is a reminder of what made classic cars so special. It was a time when automakers weren't afraid to experiment, to push the boundaries, and to try new things. Even though not every idea survived, the spirit of innovation is what keeps classic cars fascinating to this day. For those who love automotive history, the Instant-Aire system is more than just a forgotten feature, it's a symbol of a time when cars were more than just machines. They were expressions of creativity, ambition, and the belief that anything was possible. The story of Instant-Aire isn't just about an abandoned feature, it's about a lost era in the automotive industry. The 1960s were a time when car manufacturers took risks. They weren't afraid to introduce features that were untested, unusual, or even ahead of their time. It was a decade when cars were designed with personality, individuality, and bold engineering choices. Pontiac, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors were competing to create vehicles that stood out, not just with horsepower, but with features that made driving feel futuristic. Instant-Aire was part of this movement. It was a feature that represented a hands-on approach to driving, something that fit perfectly in an era where drivers took pride in understanding their cars. If you owned a car in the 1960s, chances were that you knew how to do basic maintenance yourself. You checked your own oil, replaced your own spark plugs, and understood how your engine worked. But by the 1970s and beyond, the relationship between drivers and cars started to change. Automakers moved toward sealed engines, electronic fuel injection, and computer-controlled components, technologies that improved reliability but made cars less user-serviceable. Instead of fixing problems themselves, drivers became more dependent on mechanics and roadside assistance services. This shift is one of the key reasons why a feature like Instant-Aire never had a future. It was built for a generation of drivers who saw their cars as machines they could control, modify, and repair. But as cars became more automated and self-sufficient, the need for such features disappeared. The psychological connection between drivers and their cars. One of the most fascinating aspects of classic cars is the emotional connection people have with them. For many, a car is more than just a way to get from point A to point B, it's an extension of their personality. This is especially true for car enthusiasts in the 40 to 65 age range, who grew up in an era when cars were built to last, with engines that roared and designs that turned heads. The Instant-Aire system tapped into a specific psychological need, the desire for self-reliance. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you can handle an emergency without outside help. Being able to inflate your own tire using the power of your car's engine wasn't just a convenience, it was a statement of independence and mechanical ingenuity. This concept is deeply ingrained in automotive culture. It's why so many classic car owners take pride in restoring and maintaining their vehicles. Unlike modern cars, which are filled with software and lockdown systems, classic cars offer something more tangible, a direct connection between the driver and the machine. Instant-Aire may not have lasted, but it represented the kind of mechanical simplicity and self-sufficiency that classic car enthusiasts love. In many ways, its disappearance is symbolic of a broader shift in the industry, away from hands-on driving and toward a world where cars do everything for us. Why some features stand the test of time while others fade away. History has shown that some automotive features become permanent fixtures, while others vanish into obscurity. So what separates a lasting innovation from a forgotten experiment? It often comes down to three key factors: necessity, reliability, and adaptability. Necessity plays the biggest role. The most successful automotive advancements solve problems that drivers face on a daily basis. Features like power steering, cruise control, and automatic transmissions became industry standards because they addressed common frustrations. Instant-Aire, on the other hand, solved a problem that wasn't urgent for most people. Flat tires happen, but they aren't a daily concern. And when they do occur, traditional solutions, like carrying a spare, are already effective. Reliability is another crucial factor. If a feature doesn't work consistently, it won't survive. This was one of Instant-Aire's biggest weaknesses. While the idea was solid, the real-world application was unpredictable. Some drivers reported success, while others found that the system struggled under certain conditions. Inconsistent performance can destroy trust, and once drivers lose faith in a feature, they rarely give it a second chance. Adaptability is the final piece of the puzzle. The best automotive innovations evolve over time. Consider the way early air conditioning systems were bulky and inefficient, but eventually became essential in nearly every car. Instant-Aire never had that opportunity. It was an isolated experiment, never improved upon, never refined for the future. If Pontiac had continued developing the concept, perhaps replacing vacuum power with an electric compressor, it might have had a better chance at survival. The impact of Instant-Aire on car enthusiasts today. For those who love classic cars, the Instant-Aire system is more than just an odd footnote in history. It represents a time when automakers dared to be different. Even though the feature never became mainstream, it remains an intriguing piece of Pontiac's legacy. Many car enthusiasts still find joy in tracking down and restoring rare automotive innovations like this. There's something special about uncovering a feature that most people have forgotten. It's a reminder that even failed experiments can be valuable, not just as collectibles, but as symbols of an era when cars were built with creativity and ambition. Classic car culture thrives on preserving the past, and that includes celebrating the wild ideas that never quite made it. Features like Instant-Aire remind us that there was a time when cars were full of surprises, when manufacturers weren't afraid to add something unique just to see if it worked. Looking back at what could have been. It's always interesting to think about what might have happened if Instant-Aire had been refined and reintroduced later. Could a more advanced version of the system have found success in the 1980s or 1990s? Would modern technology, such as better air compression systems or digital tire pressure sensors, have made it more reliable? The automotive world is full of what-if scenarios, and this is one of them. While we'll never know if Instant-Aire could have succeeded under different circumstances, we do know one thing: it was an idea that embodied the spirit of innovation. Even though the feature was short-lived, it remains a fascinating reminder of what the 1960s represented, a time when cars were more than just transportation. They were experiments, expressions of creativity, and testbeds for ideas that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The 1960s were a golden age of automotive creativity. Manufacturers were locked in fierce competition, not just for performance but for innovation. Every major automaker was pushing boundaries, introducing features that were bold, experimental, and sometimes ahead of their time. Pontiac, a division of General Motors, was at the forefront of this movement. Instant-Aire was born in this era of rapid experimentation. It was a time when car companies were willing to take risks, when engineers weren't held back by strict regulations or market research that dictated what features would sell best. Instead, they pursued ideas that made cars more engaging, more practical, and sometimes, just more fun. This philosophy is what made cars of the 1960s feel so personal. You weren't just buying a vehicle, you were buying an experience. Driving was something to be enjoyed, not just tolerated. That's why features like hidden headlights, push-button transmissions, and futuristic dashboard layouts became so popular. Automakers weren't afraid to try something different. Instant-Aire fit perfectly into this mindset. It wasn't a necessity, but it was a clever and useful innovation, designed for a time when drivers were expected to have a certain level of mechanical know-how. It was a feature that said, "We trust the driver to handle this." That's a stark contrast to today's vehicles, where even simple maintenance tasks often require professional intervention. The shift from mechanical to digital, why features like Instant-Aire disappeared. One of the biggest shifts in the automotive world over the past 50 years has been the transition from mechanical simplicity to digital complexity. Cars of the 1960s and 70s were built with straightforward engineering, every part had a purpose, and drivers could often diagnose and fix problems themselves. As the decades progressed, vehicles became more advanced, but also more reliant on electronics. Carburetors gave way to fuel injection, vacuum-operated components were replaced by electric motors, and mechanical gauges were swapped for digital displays. These changes made cars more efficient and reliable, but they also took away a level of control from the driver. Instant-Aire was a victim of this transition. It relied on a mechanical vacuum system, something that made sense in the 1960s but became obsolete as engine designs evolved. The rise of electronic air compressors, tire pressure monitoring systems, and run-flat tires eliminated the need for a built-in inflation system like Instant-Aire. There's also a psychological shift to consider. The average driver in the 1960s was more involved with their vehicle than the average driver today. Car owners expected to pop the hood regularly, perform basic maintenance, and have a hands-on relationship with their machines. But as technology made cars easier to own and operate, the idea of manually inflating a tire using engine vacuum seemed less practical. How Instant-Aire compares to modern tire inflation solutions. While Instant-Aire disappeared, the need for tire inflation solutions never went away. Today, drivers have several options for dealing with low tire pressure or a flat tire. But how do these solutions compare to Pontiac's lost invention? 1. Portable air compressors. The most common alternative to Instant-Aire today is a 12V portable air compressor. These small devices plug into a car's cigarette lighter socket or power outlet and use the vehicle's battery to operate an electric pump. Unlike Instant-Aire, which relied on vacuum pressure, these compressors generate their own airflow. They are small, convenient, and don't require the engine to be running at a specific RPM. However, they also have downsides. Many cheap models take a long time to fill a tire, and they can overheat with extended use. Some struggle to reach higher pressures, especially for larger tires. Instant-Aire, in theory, had the advantage of using the engine's natural vacuum, meaning it wouldn't suffer from these limitations. 2. Fix-a-flat and tire sealants. Many modern drivers rely on tire sealant kits as a temporary fix for punctures. These products inject a liquid sealant into the tire, sealing small holes and allowing the driver to continue driving until they can reach a repair shop. Some of these kits also come with small air compressors. While these products are effective in some situations, they have major drawbacks. Sealants can damage tire pressure sensors, making them costly to use. They also don't work on large punctures, sidewall damage, or blowouts. Instant-Aire didn't require chemicals or additives, it was simply a built-in way to pump air into the tire. 3. Run-flat tires. Some modern cars come equipped with run-flat tires, which are designed to maintain their shape and structure even after losing air pressure. These tires allow the driver to continue driving for a limited distance at reduced speeds. While run-flats eliminate the need for tire inflation altogether, they come with trade-offs. They are more expensive, provide a harsher ride, and wear out faster than regular tires. Instant-Aire, while outdated, didn't require a specialized tire or increased costs, it was simply an added tool for emergency situations. What Pontiac's Instant-Aire tells us about automotive evolution. The disappearance of Instant-Aire reflects a larger trend in the automotive world. Many features that were once considered innovative have been replaced by newer, more efficient solutions. But does that mean the older ideas were worse? Not necessarily. Instant-Aire was a creative, practical idea that might have worked better with further refinement. If Pontiac had continued developing the concept, perhaps integrating a small built-in compressor rather than relying on vacuum pressure, it might have had a longer lifespan. This pattern repeats throughout automotive history. Many once promising features have been lost to time, not because they were failures, but because the industry moved in a different direction. Consider. Pop-up headlights, eliminated due to safety regulations. Manual crank windows, phased out as power windows became standard. Front bench seats, replaced by bucket seats for better comfort and safety. Instant-Aire was simply another casualty of this evolution. But for those who appreciate classic cars, it remains a fascinating reminder of an era when manufacturers weren't afraid to experiment. Pontiac's lost invention may never return, but it represents a time when automakers valued creativity over convention. And in a world where cars are becoming increasingly uniform, that spirit of innovation is something worth remembering. Pontiac's Instant-Aire wasn't just a one-off gimmick. It was part of a broader trend in the automotive industry, an era when car manufacturers were constantly pushing the envelope, coming up with bold, sometimes strange, but undeniably creative features. Some of these ideas faded away because they weren't practical, while others were simply victims of changing technology, regulations, or shifting consumer habits. But there's something special about these forgotten features. They remind us of a time when cars were more than just transportation, they were a reflection of engineering ambition and a deep understanding of driver needs. They were built with personality, character, and a hands-on approach that today's vehicles often lack. Instant-Aire, in particular, stood out because it reflected a time when automakers trusted drivers to be active participants in car ownership. Unlike modern cars, where even checking tire pressure has become a computerized process, the Instant-Aire system required a level of mechanical awareness. It assumed that the driver understood how their car worked. This was common in the 1960s and 70s. Cars had manual choke controls, hand-cranked vent windows, and dashboard-mounted cigarette lighters, all small details that reinforced the idea that a car wasn't just a machine you operated, it was something you interacted with. Today, automakers have moved in the opposite direction, prioritizing convenience, automation, and reducing driver involvement as much as possible. But does that mean we've truly advanced? Or have we lost something valuable along the way? The shift toward passive driving, how innovation changed the driver's role. One of the biggest shifts in the automotive world over the past few decades is the transition from engaged driving to passive driving. Features like Instant-Aire were part of a time when the driver had an active role in maintaining and controlling their vehicle. That mindset has largely disappeared. Power steering replaced manual steering, making it easier to maneuver cars with minimal effort. Automatic transmissions replaced manuals, removing the need for drivers to engage with their engines at a deeper level. Electronic stability control and traction control took over tasks that once required skill and precision. Push-button ignitions replaced traditional keys, reducing the tactile connection between driver and machine. And in some cases, these advancements came with trade-offs. Yes, they made cars easier to operate, but they also made them less personal, less engaging, and sometimes even less durable. Instant-Aire was a direct product of the era before this shift. It was a time when automakers assumed that drivers were capable of handling minor inconveniences like low tire pressure without relying on sensors, alerts, or roadside assistance. It was a time when knowing how to work on your car wasn't a niche hobby, it was common sense. That's why features like Instant-Aire, despite being practical, didn't survive into the modern age. Today, automakers aren't designing cars for hands-on drivers. They're designing them for passive operators, people who expect their vehicles to handle everything for them, from parallel parking to emergency braking. Would Instant-Aire work in today's cars? The idea behind Instant-Aire wasn't flawed, it was just ahead of its time in some ways and behind in others. If a modern version of this system were developed today, how would it compare to the tire inflation solutions we currently use? Integration with onboard air compressors. Many modern SUVs and trucks now come with built-in air compressors, especially those designed for off-road use. These allow drivers to inflate tires on demand, similar to what Instant-Aire aimed to do. However, they rely on electric power, not engine vacuum, making them independent of engine speed and more reliable. Smart tire pressure monitoring and auto-inflation. Some high-end luxury and commercial vehicles now feature automatic tire inflation systems. These systems continuously monitor tire pressure and adjust it as needed. If Instant-Aire had been further developed, it might have evolved into something similar, an onboard system that automatically adjusted tire pressure without driver intervention. Portable tire inflation devices. With the rise of lithium battery-powered air compressors, drivers now have a convenient alternative to built-in inflation systems. These compact devices can be stored in the trunk and used whenever needed, eliminating the reliance on vacuum pressure altogether. So, does this mean Instant-Aire is completely obsolete? Not necessarily. If anything, it laid the groundwork for the idea that a car should be able to take care of its own tire pressure, a concept that modern automakers have refined into more advanced solutions. The psychological connection between drivers and their cars. There's an underlying psychology behind why features like Instant-Aire resonate with car enthusiasts, especially those who grew up in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It's not just about functionality, it's about the sense of connection between driver and machine. For many, classic cars aren't just vehicles. They're mechanical companions, machines that respond directly to the driver's input without interference from layers of electronic automation. Every click of a mechanical switch, every turn of a carburetor-adjusted throttle, every hand-cranked window adds to the sense that you are in control. Instant-Aire, in its own way, reinforced that relationship. It wasn't an automatic system that worked behind the scenes, it was a tool given to the driver, something that required knowledge, effort, and engagement. This is why so many older car enthusiasts feel disconnected from modern vehicles. Today's cars are engineered for effortless operation, but in doing so, they've removed much of what made driving feel engaging, personal, and rewarding. Pontiac's Instant-Aire may be a forgotten feature, but it represents an era when cars had soul, character, and a sense of mechanical honesty. And for those who appreciate that kind of automotive experience, it's a reminder of just how much the driving world has changed. The story of Pontiac's Instant-Aire is more than just the tale of a forgotten feature, it's a glimpse into a time when car manufacturers prioritized clever, mechanical solutions over digital complexity. It represents an era when automakers believed that the driver should be an active participant in their vehicle's maintenance, not just a passive observer relying on warning lights and automated systems. This mindset wasn't exclusive to Pontiac. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, automakers across the industry were developing mechanical solutions to common problems, features that, by today's standards, may seem unconventional, but were rooted in practicality. Take, for example, Chrysler's Autopilot cruise control system from the late 1950s. Unlike today's electronically governed cruise control, this system was purely mechanical, using vacuum pressure and linkages to maintain speed. It wasn't about convenience, it was about giving the driver control over a feature that could make long drives easier. Or consider Cadillac's Twilight Sentinel, an automatic headlamp dimming system from the early 1960s. It relied on a light-sensitive photocell to detect oncoming headlights and adjust brightness accordingly. While modern versions of this system are now electronic and fully integrated into a car's onboard computer, the original design was a simple, self-contained device that required no software, no sensors, and no firmware updates. Instant-Aire fits into this same category. It was a mechanical solution for an everyday problem, something that was designed to be used only when needed, without adding unnecessary weight or cost to the vehicle. Why automakers moved away from mechanical solutions? So why did features like Instant-Aire disappear? The answer isn't just about technology, it's about how cars, regulations, and consumer expectations evolved over time. The push for safety and standardization. By the 1970s and 80s, government regulations around vehicle safety, emissions, and reliability were tightening. Automakers were required to phase out certain mechanical components in favor of more standardized and fail-safe designs. Vacuum-operated accessories were gradually replaced with electric motors, as they were more reliable and didn't depend on engine load. Fuel-injected engines replaced carburetors, making it more difficult to integrate vacuum-powered accessories like Instant-Aire. Mandatory tire pressure monitoring systems, TPMS, meant that manufacturers were focusing more on detection rather than prevention. As a result, Instant-Aire, despite its simplicity, was no longer a practical feature in a world where car designs were becoming more regulated, streamlined, and electronically managed. Consumer preferences shifted toward convenience. Another major reason mechanical innovations like Instant-Aire disappeared is that modern drivers simply don't want to be as involved with their car's mechanics as previous generations did. In the 1960s, it was common for drivers to check their own oil levels and tire pressure regularly, perform minor mechanical work themselves, understand the basic functioning of their vehicle's engine and accessories. But as cars became more complex, this relationship changed. Today's drivers expect their cars to diagnose their own issues, send alerts when something is wrong, and even schedule service automatically. Features like self-sealing tires, run-flat technology, and roadside assistance programs have removed the need for drivers to carry built-in inflation systems. This shift toward convenience meant that features requiring manual intervention, like Instant-Aire, became less desirable. The rise of electronics and digital controls. By the 1980s and 90s, automotive engineering had fully embraced electronics. Everything from fuel management to climate control was now handled by microprocessors, making purely mechanical systems obsolete. Analog gauges were replaced with digital readouts. Mechanical switches gave way to electronic buttons and touch controls. Manually adjustable seats, mirrors, and windows were replaced with power-operated versions. In this new era, a feature like Instant-Aire, which relied entirely on vacuum pressure and driver operation, felt outdated. Automakers were no longer interested in simple mechanical add-ons. They were focused on digital integration, automation, and seamless driver experiences. The resurgence of classic car features in the modern age. Interestingly, while most of the world has moved away from mechanically driven solutions, there has been a growing resurgence in interest for old-school automotive technology. Classic cars are more popular than ever, and many drivers are realizing that some of the forgotten innovations of the past were actually more practical, more reliable, and more engaging than their modern replacements. Consider the growing trend of manual transmissions making a comeback in enthusiast vehicles. Analog gauge clusters being preferred by drivers who dislike digital dashboards. Classic muscle cars being restored with original carburetors instead of electronic fuel injection. This raises an interesting question: if automakers were willing to reintroduce mechanical solutions today, would they still be viable? Instant-Aire, for example, could theoretically be re-engineered using modern materials and a more efficient vacuum system. Instead of relying on the engine's vacuum, it could integrate with a small onboard electric compressor, making it functionally similar to today's portable air pumps but without requiring an external power source. Would it sell? Maybe not as a mainstream feature, but as an option for classic car enthusiasts, off-road adventurers, or survivalists, it could have real appeal. What Instant-Aire tells us about the future of automotive design. Looking back at innovations like Instant-Aire isn't just about nostalgia, it's about understanding how cars have evolved and whether we've actually improved upon every aspect of automotive design. Yes, today's cars are heavy checkmark more efficient, heavy checkmark more comfortable, heavy checkmark packed with advanced safety features. But they're also heavy multiplication X more complicated, heavy multiplication X more reliant on digital systems, heavy multiplication X less DIY friendly for the average driver. Pontiac's Instant-Aire reminds us that not all advancements come from making things more complex. Sometimes, the simplest solutions are the most effective. It's a lesson that today's automakers could learn from, especially as drivers start looking for ways to reconnect with the mechanical aspects of their vehicles. As the automotive world moves toward fully electric and autonomous vehicles, we may never see another system like Instant-Aire. But its legacy serves as a reminder that cars weren't always designed to be passive, computerized appliances. They were once built with features that empowered the driver, features that made driving an interactive experience rather than a background task. And for those who appreciate the golden era of automotive innovation, that's something worth remembering. The disappearance of mechanical ingenuity in modern cars. The transition from purely mechanical innovations, like Pontiac's Instant-Aire, to fully electronic systems was not just a shift in technology, it was a complete transformation of how automakers designed, marketed, and sold cars. The move away from simple, practical solutions wasn't necessarily about making cars better, it was about making them more marketable, more regulated, and more dependent on proprietary technology. For decades, automakers prided themselves on engineering cars that could be maintained, repaired, and even modified by their owners. The garage was a place of mechanical connection, where a driver could adjust timing, clean a carburetor, or fix a small issue without needing expensive diagnostic tools. Instant-Aire fit perfectly into this era. It was a feature that made sense for drivers who understood their cars, who knew the importance of maintaining proper tire pressure and saw a built-in inflation system as a convenience rather than an unnecessary gimmick. But today, the average car owner has almost no involvement with the mechanical aspects of their vehicle. Modern cars are equipped with sealed engines, electronic fuel management, and computer-controlled diagnostics that lock out any user intervention beyond basic maintenance. Something as simple as checking tire pressure has been replaced by digital sensors, and instead of providing a mechanical solution to a potential issue, automakers now rely on alerts, reminders, and dealer service appointments. The corporate influence on automotive innovation. One of the biggest reasons features like Instant-Aire disappeared is the changing priorities of automakers. In the past, companies like Pontiac, Ford, and Chrysler thrived on innovation that added real-world practicality to their vehicles. They weren't afraid to experiment with mechanical systems that provided hands-on solutions to everyday problems. But as the industry evolved, the business model shifted. Instead of building cars that empower drivers to maintain and repair them, manufacturers began designing vehicles with planned obsolescence in mind. This shift can be seen in several key changes. The rise of proprietary technology. Older cars relied on universal parts and mechanical systems that could be repaired or replaced by nearly anyone with basic mechanical knowledge. Today's cars use proprietary software, electronic modules, and locked ECUs, making it impossible for the average person to fix even minor issues without dealer intervention. A focus on subscription-based features. Instead of offering built-in mechanical solutions, many automakers have started shifting to subscription-based models for convenience features. BMW, for example, attempted to charge monthly fees for heated seats, a move that shows just how far the industry has moved from mechanical ingenuity to corporate-driven profit strategies. Dependence on electronics over mechanics. Features like Instant-Aire were designed to function without complicated electronics. They relied on simple principles of engineering and mechanical efficiency. Today, even the most basic vehicle functions are controlled by integrated circuits, software patches, and connectivity to external servers. The question is, have we really made cars better, or just more complicated? The downsides of over-engineering. For many car enthusiasts, the shift away from mechanical solutions has come at a cost. While modern vehicles are undeniably safer and more efficient, they've also become less intuitive, less reparable, and in many cases, less engaging to drive. Think about something as simple as a throttle system. In older cars, the accelerator pedal was directly connected to the engine's throttle body through a physical cable. Pressing the gas pedal meant instantaneous mechanical response. But in today's vehicles, everything is controlled by drive-by-wire systems, where input from the accelerator is sent to an electronic control module, processed, and then translated into throttle response. This type of system introduces delays, artificial limitations, and software-controlled restrictions that disconnect the driver from the car's natural mechanics. The same principle applies to electric power steering, brake-by-wire systems, and even electronic gear selectors that replaced the simple mechanical shifter with complicated, failure-prone electronic switches. Pontiac's Instant-Aire represents the kind of engineering that trusted the driver to be part of the solution rather than relying on computers to make decisions for them. It was built for an era where cars weren't disposable consumer products, but long-term investments designed for real-world use. Would Instant-Aire work in today's market? If Pontiac's Instant-Aire were reintroduced today, how would modern drivers react? Would it be seen as an outdated gimmick, or would it appeal to a niche group of enthusiasts who appreciate hands-on automotive technology? Looking at today's trends, there's a strong case that a modernized version of Instant-Aire could actually find success, especially among people who value self-sufficiency and reliability over high-tech convenience. Consider the rise of overlanding and off-road enthusiasts. Many off-road drivers invest in portable air compressors for adjusting tire pressure on the go. A built-in inflation system, even one based on modern electric vacuum technology, could be a highly sought-after feature for rugged vehicles. Classic car restorers and purists. As more people restore and preserve vintage cars, there's a growing appreciation for mechanical simplicity. Features like Instant-Aire fit perfectly into this philosophy, providing a practical function without adding unnecessary complexity. The DIY and self-reliance movement. In a world where technology is becoming more locked down, many people are looking for ways to maintain and repair their own vehicles. A modern Instant-Aire system, designed to be serviceable and mechanically operated, could resonate with drivers who reject the idea that every car issue requires dealership intervention. It's not hard to imagine a future where car manufacturers revisit the idea of built-in tire inflation systems. But the difference is, if a feature like Instant-Aire were introduced today, it would likely be packaged as a luxury option, requiring expensive add-ons or proprietary software to function, defeating the entire purpose of its original design. The legacy of Instant-Aire and what it represents. The story of Pontiac's Instant-Aire is about more than just a forgotten feature. It's a reminder of how much the automotive world has changed, and how much we've lost in the process. We've moved away from mechanical ingenuity in favor of software-based solutions. We've replaced user-serviceable features with locked-down proprietary technology. We've traded practical engineering for corporate-driven decision-making that prioritizes profit over function.